She cradled a baby, the world was told, was adopted. But in truth, she was Clark Gable's secret daughter. Studios starved Judy Garland with pills instead of meals, and tabloids turned Arbuckle's trial into Hollywood's first massive disgrace. They were lies, cover-ups, and betrayals. Here are 17 of Hollywood's biggest scandals the industry tried to bury forever. Number 1. Clark Gable, the secret child. She was born with the face of Hollywood royalty, but no one dared to whisper whose blood ran in her veins. For decades, a little girl named Judy believed she was just another adopted child of a glamorous actress. What she never knew, what MGM swore the world would never know, was that her father was none other than Clark Gable, the king of Hollywood himself. In the mid-1930s, Gable was at the height of his charm, the leading man every studio banked on and every woman dreamed of. Fresh off films like It Happened One Night, 1934, which had earned him an Academy Award, he began filming Call of the Wild, 1935, opposite Loretta Young. On screen, they were adventurers battling the frozen wilderness. Off-screen, they shared a different kind of secret, an affair that would shake 2 careers if it ever came to light. Gable, married at the time, could not risk scandal. Young, devoutly Catholic, could not risk condemnation. The stakes were enormous, and MGM's fixers knew it. By the time Loretta realized she was pregnant, the studio machine was already whirring. Executives arranged for her to quietly disappear from Hollywood under the guise of a European vacation. In truth, she gave birth in California in 1935, and the child was sent away almost immediately. When Loretta returned to the spotlight months later, the press marveled at her resilience. No one guessed what had been buried beneath the headlines, but the cover-up didn't end there. In 1937, Loretta staged the ultimate deception. She announced she had adopted a baby girl, introducing Judy to the world as though she were a stranger's child. Gossip columnists suspected, but no one dared print it. The studio's iron grip on reporters and the presence of MGM's notorious fixer, Eddie Mannix, kept lips sealed. The secret held for decades, long after Gone with the Wind, 1939, had crowned Gable a legend. It wasn't until Judy was well into adulthood that she learned the truth of her parentage. By then, Clark Gable was long gone, having died in 1960 without ever publicly acknowledging her. Hollywood called him the King, but his greatest role may have been hiding in plain sight. As a father, the world was never meant to see. Number 2. Judy Garland. Starved, drugged, and broken by MGM. The lights on the MGM lot never dimmed, but behind the curtains a child was being consumed. At just 14, Judy Garland was handed a cup of coffee for breakfast, a cigarette for lunch, and a pill to keep her awake through the night. Her voice could fill theaters across America, but the studio demanded something else, a body that never grew, never rested, never ate. Judy Garland, forever remembered as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, 1939, wasn't born into scandal. She was manufactured into it. MGM executives, led by the formidable Louis B. Mayer, knew her innocence was box office gold. But behind closed doors, they berated her looks, calling her a fat little pig with pigtails. To keep her slim, they enforced a regime of stimulants by day and sleeping tablets by night, a brutal cycle that blurred the lines between performance and survival. By the time most teenagers were discovering freedom, Judy was discovering shackles. The cruelty wasn't only chemical. Long hours under blazing studio lamps left her exhausted, and gossip columnists began circling when her mood wavered or when she collapsed on set. Still, Mayer and the MGM machine pushed harder, parading her through back-to-back pictures. Babes in Arms, 1939. Meet Me in St. Louis, 1944. And countless musicals that cemented her as America's sweetheart. To audiences, her smile glowed like a lantern in the dark war years. To Judy, it was a mask, carefully stitched over exhaustion and humiliation. By the 1950s, the mask was fraying. Years of chemical control left her trembling, unreliable in the studio's eyes, and box office numbers began to dip. Hollywood, which had created the myth of Judy Garland, now turned away, labeling her difficult and replacing her in roles she once owned. Even when she found new triumphs, like her tour de force performance in A Star is Born, 1954, the shadow of her past followed close behind. When Judy Garland passed in 1969 at just 47, the world mourned as though it had lost a child it had raised itself. But in truth, Hollywood had broken that child long before. The girl who once sang of a rainbow was forced to live in a world of shadows, and she never found her way home. Number 3. Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle, the trial that nearly ended Hollywood. The screams came from behind the closed door of a San Francisco hotel suite in 1921. When guests rushed in, they found actress Virginia Rappe writhing in agony. Days later, she was dead, and the man at the center of the storm was Roscoe "Fatty" Arbuckle, one of the most beloved comedians of silent pictures. Overnight, the king of laughter became the face of Hollywood's first great disgrace. At the time, Arbuckle was a household name, second only to Chaplin in comic genius. Audiences adored him in films like The Roundup, 1920, where his rotund frame and gentle charm made him both endearing and hilarious. But that September, headlines turned his name into poison. He was accused of a violent assault that allegedly led to Rappe's fatal internal injuries. The press had never been so vicious. Tabloids screamed of moral rot in Hollywood, and gossip columnists declared him guilty before the courtroom ever did. The trials that followed, 3 in total, became a circus. Each day reporters packed the courtroom, sketching Arbuckle's weary face while jurors heard lurid testimony and whispered rumors. Though there was no medical evidence tying him to foul play, the prosecution painted him as a symbol of Hollywood excess. The champagne-soaked parties, the hotel suites filled with secrets. With the public already scandalized by tales of studio debauchery, Arbuckle was the perfect scapegoat. By the third trial in 1922, the tide had shifted. Witness after witness faltered, and the jury not only acquitted Arbuckle, but issued a rare apology, stating he had been greatly wronged. But the damage was irreversible. Paramount, once proud to market his name in bold letters, abandoned him. His films were pulled from theaters, his contracts voided, and audiences who once laughed until they cried now turned away in disgust. Roscoe Arbuckle lived another decade, occasionally directing under pseudonyms, but the golden career was gone. He died in 1933 at just 46, the year he had finally signed a new studio contract. Hollywood's first scandal trial proved a cruel irony. He was innocent in court, but guilty in the eyes of history. And with him, the illusion of a spotless golden age was shattered forever. Number 4. Jean Harlow, A Husband's Bizarre Death. On a warm September morning in 1932, the brightest blonde in Hollywood awoke to find her world turned upside down. Jean Harlow's husband, MGM producer Paul Byrne, lay dead in their Beverly Hills home. Beside him, a revolver and a cryptic note that ended with the chilling line, "Last night was only a comedy." It was the kind of mystery that no scriptwriter could have imagined, yet it played out under the very roof of Hollywood's reigning platinum goddess. Jean Harlow, known to millions as the blonde bombshell, was at the height of her fame. Films like Hell's Angels, 1930, and Red-Headed Woman, 1932, had turned her into a cultural sensation. But the MGM publicity machine that polished her image now faced catastrophe. Studio executives, led by Louis B. Mayer and fixer Eddie Mannix, rushed to the scene before reporters arrived. Instead of transparency, they spun a narrative. Byrne had taken his own life out of despair over physical shortcomings. For a time, the public believed it, But the truth was far murkier. The scandal deepened days later, when Dorothy Millette, Byrne's longtime companion before Harlow, was found drowned in a river near Sacramento. Rumors ignited. Had Byrne never truly left her? Had Millette confronted him at the Harlow home that night? Was Jean sent away deliberately so the studio could manage the chaos? Gossip columnists like Luella Parsons and Hedda Hopper hinted at secrets, but never dared print the ugliest theories. MGM's reach was too strong. Through it all, Harlow maintained her composure, continuing to film Red Dust, 1932, opposite Clark Gable, just days after Byrne's death. On screen, she radiated wit and charm, but behind the camera she was shadowed by whispers that she had married a man she never truly knew. The studios worked tirelessly to shield her, insisting she was an innocent widow, untouched by scandal. Yet the tragedy clung to her career. When Harlow herself died only 5 years later at the age of 26, many said she never escaped the ghost of Paul Byrne. Hollywood built her into a legend of laughter and light, but her story was haunted by one of its darkest mysteries: an unsolved death, a vanished mistress, and a note that still taunts history. Number 5. Lana Turner, the mobster murder in her living room. The scream that tore through Beverly Hills on the night of April 4th, 1958, was unlike any line Lana Turner had ever delivered on screen. When police arrived, they found Johnny Stompanato, her handsome but violent lover, lying on the floor of her pink-carpeted bedroom. A knife was buried in his chest, and the one holding it, trembling and tear-streaked, was not Lana Turner, but her 14-year-old daughter, Cheryl. Lana Turner, the sweater girl who had electrified audiences in The Postman Always Rings, twice, 1946, was no stranger to scandal. But nothing could have prepared the public for this. Stompanato was no ordinary suitor. He was a known mobster, tied to Mickey Cohen's Los Angeles crime syndicate. Lana had fallen for him in a whirlwind romance, but the relationship quickly soured into jealousy, control, and threats. He shadowed her career, even threatening actor Sean Connery during filming in London. By the time of that fateful night, whispers of violence had already reached the gossip columns. The official story, as Lana tearfully told the court, was one of self-defense. She claimed Cheryl had leapt to protect her mother from another brutal outburst. The jury agreed, ruling the killing justifiable. Still, the scene captured the nation's imagination. Glamour colliding with bloodstains. Newspapers splashed it across front pages, and columnists like Hedda Hopper dissected every detail, from Lana's testimony to Cheryl's sobs. Was it really the daughter's desperate act? Or had Hollywood's great starlet orchestrated a cover-up, letting her child take the blame? Even in acquittal, the scandal clung to Turner's career like smoke in a nightclub. She went on to star in Imitation of Life, 1959, a film steeped in themes of sacrifice and shame, life imitating art in the cruelest way. To audiences, she appeared radiant, poised, untouchable. But behind her eyes, many saw the shadow of that night, the secret no performance could ever erase. For Lana Turner, the cameras kept rolling, but the image had forever changed. She was still Hollywood royalty, but now her crown was tarnished by whispers of a mobster's death and a daughter's sacrifice. And long after the trial ended, people wondered, was Lana the victim or the director of the most tragic scene of her life? Number 6. Ingrid Bergman, branded a force for evil. In 1949, the applause that once followed Ingrid Bergman turned into jeers. Senators in Washington denounced her as a powerful influence for evil, and churches condemned her from the pulpit. What sin had America's golden girl committed? She had fallen in love, and that love shattered the illusion the studios had so carefully built. Only a few years earlier, Bergman had been Hollywood's most radiant star. Audiences adored her in Casablanca, 1942, where her quiet heartbreak opposite Humphrey Bogart became one of cinema's most immortal moments. She was the wholesome European beauty who seemed untouched by scandal. Married to a Swedish doctor, she played devoted wives and noble heroines, roles that reinforced the public's belief in her purity. But during the filming of Stromboli, 1949, in Italy, everything changed. She began an affair with director Roberto Rossellini, and soon she was carrying his child. The revelation hit Hollywood like a bombshell. Gossip columnists spread the story with relish, fanning outrage across the country. For many Americans, Bergman's characters had been symbols of virtue during the war years. Now she was branded a hypocrite. The Senate itself weighed in, with one member calling her a disgrace to womanhood. Studio bosses, terrified of the backlash, cut ties, and theaters in some states refused to show her films. Overnight, she went from beloved leading lady to exiled pariah, yet Bergman refused to apologize. She divorced her husband, married Rossellini, and had 3 children with him. For a time, she lived in Italy, far from the bright lights of Hollywood, her once glittering career seemingly over. But the story did not end in exile. A decade later, Bergman returned in triumph with Anastasia, 1956, winning an Academy Award and silencing many of her critics. Her comeback proved that even in a town built on morality tales, redemption was possible. Still, the scar of that scandal never fully faded. Ingrid Bergman was remembered as both saint and sinner, a woman who defied the world's expectations and paid the price. Hollywood once called her a force for evil, but history remembers her as something far more dangerous, a woman who chose to live by her own script. Number 7. Natalie Wood. The drowning that still haunts Hollywood. The waves lapped quietly against the yacht, but the silence that followed was deafening. On the morning of November 29, 1981, Natalie Wood, America's beloved child star turned leading lady, was found floating face down in the waters off Catalina Island. She had vanished from the deck of the Splendor during a stormy night of drinking, arguments, and whispered tensions. When her body was pulled from the Pacific, Hollywood was forced to confront a mystery that has never truly been solved. Natalie Wood had been in the public eye since she was 8 years old, stealing hearts in Miracle on 34th Street, 1947. By her 20s, she was one of the brightest stars of her generation, nominated for 3 Oscars for roles in Rebel Without a Cause, 1955, Splendor in the Grass, 1961, and West Side Story, 1961. On screen, she radiated innocence and vulnerability. Off-screen, her life was defined by volatile marriages, passionate affairs, and a reputation for fragility. But nothing in her dramatic career rivaled the tragedy that unfolded that Thanksgiving weekend aboard the yacht she shared with her husband, actor Robert Wagner, and her co-star, Christopher Walken. What happened on the Splendor remains one of Hollywood's most enduring riddles. Some claimed Natalie argued bitterly with Wagner before disappearing. Others suggested she slipped trying to secure a dinghy in the dark. The official ruling at the time was accidental drowning, but for those who followed the case, the story never quite fit. A shattered wine bottle, conflicting witness accounts, and Wagner's evasive testimony fueled speculation for decades. Gossip columnists seized on every detail, turning her death into tabloid scripture. In 2011, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department reopened the case, citing new testimony from the yacht's captain. By 2018, Robert Wagner himself was officially named a person of interest, though no charges were ever filed. Nearly half a century later, the questions still linger like fog over the Pacific. Natalie Wood's life was a testament to Hollywood dreams, glittering, fragile, and perilously short. She survived the studio system, outshined the gossip mills, and reached the top of her profession. But in the end, her most famous role was one she never chose, the tragic heroine of a mystery the sea still keeps. Number 8. Joan Crawford. The Velvet Lips. Scandal long before she was a star. Whispers claimed a reel of film could destroy her. It was said to be raw, illicit, and damning. An early performance Joan Crawford would spend her entire life trying to outrun. The title, Velvet Lips, never appeared on a marquee, but in smoky back rooms of Hollywood, it was a ghost that threatened to swallow her career whole. By the 1930s, Crawford was MGM's dazzling chameleon, reinventing herself from flapper to working-class heroine in hits like Our Dancing Daughters, 1928, and Grand Hotel, 1932. Audiences adored her angular beauty, her sharp intelligence, her rise from rags to riches. But behind the studio gloss, rumors spread that as a struggling teenager in Texas, she had acted in a risque short. In the gossip columns, it was treated as Hollywood's most dangerous rumor. If proven true, it could topple a star who was already competing with Norma Shearer and Greta Garbo for the throne of MGM's leading lady. That was when Eddie Mannix, MGM's notorious fixer, allegedly stepped in. Mannix was the studio's shadowy problem solver, the man who made inconvenient scandals vanish. According to long-circulated stories, when blackmailers claimed to hold the negative of Velvet Lips, Mannix reached out to mob contacts to negotiate or threaten. Some said MGM quietly paid $100,000, a king's ransom in Depression-era Hollywood, to bury the film forever. Others swore Mannix offered far less, letting his underworld allies handle the rest. The reels never resurfaced. For Joan Crawford, the ghost of Velvet Lips was more than rumor. It was a lifelong fear. Even at the height of her fame in Mildred Pierce, 1945, the role that won her an Oscar, she dreaded the day an old secret might come back to ruin her. Colleagues whispered that her relentless drive, her obsession with image, and even her infamous clashes with her children were fueled by one truth. She knew how fragile her empire really was. Hollywood crowned Joan Crawford as one of its immortals, but she lived like a fugitive from her own past. The real may never have been real, but the fear was. And in a town built on illusions, sometimes fear itself is the deadliest scandal of all. Number 9. Charlie Chaplin, exiled genius. The telegram arrived like a dagger. Charlie Chaplin was not welcome home. It was 1952, and the most famous face in Hollywood, the little tramp himself, was barred from re-entering the United States. While audiences still laughed at his bowler hat and cane, government officials branded him a danger, a man whose politics and personal life had made him a pariah in the land that had once worshipped him. Chaplin was not just a comedian. He was the very soul of silent cinema. From The Kid, 1921, to City Lights, 1931, his films carried Depression-era audiences through hunger and hardship with laughter that felt like survival. By the time of The Great Dictator, 1940, in which he openly mocked Hitler, Chaplin had turned comedy into political weaponry. But his willingness to speak out against fascism, against war, against American conformity, drew suspicion in an age when loyalty oaths and the House Un-American Activities Committee haunted Hollywood like a shadow. At the same time, his private scandals gave his critics fresh ammunition. Chaplin's tumultuous romances, his messy divorces, and a highly publicized paternity suit made tabloid gold. Gossip columnists painted him as immoral, while politicians cast him as un-American. The final blow came when Attorney General James P. McGrenery revoked his re-entry permit while Chaplin was in London promoting Limelight, 1952. Overnight, he was an exile, a man stripped of the country he had helped put on the cultural map. Chaplin settled in Switzerland, where the laughter of his early films echoed like memories of a home he could never return to. He continued working, directing A King in New York, 1957, a bitter satire of the very country that had cast him out. But the America that once adored him would not see him again until 1972, when a frail Chaplin returned to receive an honorary Academy Award. The ovation lasted 12 minutes. A belated apology wrapped in applause. Charlie Chaplin had shown the world that laughter could be both balm and blade. Yet Hollywood's brightest genius learned the cruelest irony. The country that had once embraced the tramp sent him walking away for good. Number 10. Marilyn Monroe. Death by a fatal mix of pills. The phone rang just after midnight, August 5, 1962. Inside her Brentwood home, Marilyn Monroe lay lifeless, a bottle of barbiturates at her bedside. The official story was simple. A fatal mix of pills had silenced Hollywood's brightest star at only 36, but the whispers began before the body was even removed, and they have never stopped. Marilyn Monroe was more than a star. She was a symbol. From her dazzling turn in Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, 1953, to her iconic subway great scene in The 7-Year Itch, 1955, she embodied glamour and vulnerability in equal measure. On screen, she was radiant. Off-screen, she was fragile, hounded by gossip columnists, studio bosses, and the relentless weight of being the most photographed woman in the world. The public adored her, yet behind the camera, she battled insomnia, isolation, and the pills that kept her moving through endless days and sleepless nights. The scandal of her death, however, was not just in the tragedy. It was in the secrets people believed she carried. Monroe's ties to President John F. Kennedy and his brother Robert became the stuff of legend. The breathy serenade of Happy Birthday, Mr. President in May 1962 was already infamous. 3 months later, her sudden death fueled suspicions of political cover-up. Some whispered that she knew too much about the Kennedys, others that the mob had silenced her to protect powerful men. Even the studios, who had once exploited her image, were rumored to have feared what she might reveal. Officially, the coroner called it probable suicide. But the inconsistencies, the missing phone records, the shifting testimonies, the housekeeper's odd behavior, kept conspiracy theories alive. To this day, books, documentaries, and endless speculation treat Monroe's death less like a tragedy and more like an unsolved crime. What remains undeniable is the irony. Marilyn Monroe had been the dream of millions, the woman every man desired and every woman envied. Yet, in the end, she died alone in a quiet room, surrounded not by admirers, but by silence and unanswered questions. Hollywood promised her immortality, but it delivered only mystery. And perhaps that is why she endures, not just as a star, but as a secret the world is still trying to solve. Number 11. Howard Hughes. Hollywood's reclusive tyrant. Behind closed doors, the richest man in Hollywood became its cruelest puppeteer. Howard Hughes, aviation mogul turned film producer, lured actresses into contracts that promised stardom but often delivered heartbreak. He staged relationships like publicity stunts, monitored women like property, and left broken careers in his wake. For every glamour photograph splashed across Life magazine, there was another young actress terrified of his phone calls. In the 1930s and 1940s, Hughes was both admired and feared. His film Hell's Angels, 1930, was a spectacle of aerial combat, costing an unheard-of $4 million. He dated the most luminous women of the era, Katharine Hepburn, Ava Gardner, Lana Turner, but few romances were real, and many were orchestrated to keep Hughes in the headlines. Gossip columnists like Hedda Hopper fed on his affairs, rarely noting that behind the champagne smiles lay manipulation. Actresses signed to his RKO studio often found themselves sidelined if they resisted his control, their careers sabotaged with a single phone call. By the 1950s, the mogul's eccentricities escalated into obsession. He locked himself in darkened screening rooms for days, watching films on repeat, eating little, and scribbling notes. Assistants recalled bizarre rituals, Hughes demanding that they use tissues to hand him objects, or instructing them to burn their clothes after errands. His Las Vegas empire became his fortress, where he dictated orders from shuttered penthouse suites. Hollywood once dazzled by his power, grew uneasy. Rumors spread of bugged hotel rooms, endless jars of stored urine, and a man so paranoid he feared sunlight. The tycoon who once commanded studios and Senate hearings now barricaded himself in silence, unseen for years. By the time of his death in 1976, Hughes was almost unrecognizable. Gaunt, with fingernails grown grotesquely long, his fortune guarded by layers of secrecy. The irony was brutal. Howard Hughes had built a reputation as Hollywood's boldest visionary, the man who flew higher and dreamed bigger than anyone else. Yet he ended as its most tragic recluse, a tyrant imprisoned not by rivals or scandals, but by his own unraveling mind. For all his billions, he proved the oldest Hollywood truth: power without love is only another kind of cage. Number 12. Peg Entwistle, the Hollywood sign girl. On a September night in 1932, a figure climbed the barren hillside of Mount Lee, her footsteps crunching on dry brush. She scaled the ladder of the massive white H that loomed over Los Angeles, looked down at the city of broken promises, and leapt. When searchers found her body beneath the Hollywoodland sign, a single note lay nearby. She was simply too tired to go on. The Dream Factory had claimed its first shrine. Peg Entwistle was not yet a household name, but she was hardly a novice. She had shared a stage with Humphrey Bogart and earned acclaim on Broadway before making the journey west. RKO gave her a contract, and in 1932 she appeared in 13 Women, a thriller that should have launched her career. But the studio, already in financial crisis, quietly released her from her contract. At just 24 years old, she was alone in a city that promised everything and delivered nothing. The irony was almost unbearable. Days after her death, a letter arrived at her home offering Peg a leading role. Ironically, the part of a young woman who takes her own life. Hollywood's timing was crueler than fiction. Gossip columnists latched onto the story, casting Peg as the tragic emblem of dashed ambition. For Depression-era audiences who watched the glittering rise of stars like Jean Harlow and Clark Gable, her fate was a stark reminder. Not every face illuminated by the spotlight survived its heat. Over the decades, Peg's story has taken on a ghostly afterlife. Locals still whisper about sightings of a young woman near the sign, drifting through the night in 1930s attire. For many, she became more famous in death than in life. The girl who turned Hollywood's own landmark into a symbol of shattered dreams. Peg Entwistle wanted nothing more than what Hollywood promised: a chance to shine. Instead, she became its cautionary tale, immortalized not on the silver screen, but in the shadows beneath those giant white letters. The studios built the sign to sell glamour. Peg transformed it into a monument of heartbreak. Number 13. Alfred Hitchcock. Obsession with Tippi Hedren. The master of suspense built terror on screen, but his darkest obsession played out behind closed doors. In the early 1960s, Alfred Hitchcock installed a secret door connecting his office to actress Tippi Hedren's dressing room. To the world, he was the genius behind Psycho, 1960, and North by Northwest, 1959. To her, he was a shadow in the corridor, watching, waiting, determined to possess the very star he had discovered. Tippi Hedren was a fashion model when Hitchcock plucked her from obscurity, casting her in The Birds, 1963. Audiences were mesmerized by her icy elegance and poise, believing they were witnessing the birth of a new Grace Kelly. But while Hitchcock was crafting nightmares for the screen, he was creating them in Hedren's real life. She later recalled that he dictated her every move, controlling her career, her wardrobe, even her meals. The studio system may have bound many actresses, but Hitchcock's grip was personal and suffocating. The obsession grew darker during Marnie, 1964. Hitchcock staged scenes that mirrored his own fixation, writing scripts that blurred the line between direction and domination. Hedren described being cornered in private, subjected to advances she could not refuse without risking her career. When she resisted, Hitchcock's cruelty became vindictive. He threatened to destroy her future in Hollywood, and he followed through. After Marnie, her once bright career dimmed, the phone stopped ringing and offers vanished. For decades, these stories lived in whispers, shared among insiders, but rarely printed. Only years later, in Hedren's memoir and dramatizations like the film The Girl, 2012, did the full picture emerge. Hitchcock's obsession had left scars, not just on her, but on the legacy of a director celebrated as untouchable. The irony is bitter. Alfred Hitchcock shaped Hollywood thrillers, giving audiences unforgettable chills. Yet the most terrifying story wasn't on celluloid. It was the private torment of a woman trapped in his orbit. For Tippi Hedren, survival came not through applause, but through walking away from the man who had promised to make her immortal. And for Hitchcock, the cost of genius was the truth that history would not forget. Number 14. Thomas Ince, The Murder Yacht Mystery. The whispers began the moment the yacht returned to shore. Thomas Ince, one of Hollywood's pioneering producers, was dead after a weekend aboard William Randolph Hearst's lavish vessel, the Oneida. The official story was indigestion, but few believed that a man could board Hearst's floating palace alive and leave in a coffin. Rumors spread like wildfire. Had Hearst pulled the trigger himself in a jealous rage, aiming not at Ince, but at Charlie Chaplin? Ince was no ordinary figure. Known as the father of the Western, he had built Inceville Studios and shaped the look of early silent films. By 1924, he was negotiating with Hearst to expand his empire, rubbing elbows with Chaplin and gossip columnist Luella Parsons, who were also aboard that fateful weekend. But beneath the glittering company, scandal brewed. Hearst was notoriously possessive of his mistress, actress Marion Davies, and Chaplin was rumored to be pursuing her affections. When the yacht set sail, Hollywood's most powerful egos collided under one roof. The details of Ince's death never made sense. Reports claimed he left the yacht early after a sudden illness, only to die at his home the next day. Yet witnesses whispered of a gunshot, of hurried cover-ups, of doctors summoned too late. Parsons, curiously, emerged from the weekend with an ironclad lifetime contract from Hearst's newspaper empire, leading many to believe she had been bought into silence. The press dutifully printed Hearst's version, but in studio backlots and speakeasies, the story everyone repeated was far darker. Hollywood thrived on secrets, but this one lingered too loudly. Chaplin never spoke publicly about what he saw. Davies denied everything, and Hearst, wielding his media empire, buried the narrative with his own headlines. Still, the legend endured that Ince had been mistaken for Chaplin in the dark and paid with his life. Nearly a century later, the truth remains buried at sea. Thomas Ince's career promised to make him an immortal of early Hollywood. Yet he is remembered instead for how he died, or perhaps for how his death was concealed. The man who gave the world its first great westerns became the central figure in a mystery more enduring than any film he ever produced. Number 15. Rita Hayworth. Groomed, used, and forgotten. She was sold as the love goddess, but Rita Hayworth's image was as manufactured as the perfume ads that carried her face. Behind the sultry poses and technicolor allure was a woman reshaped by a system that cared little for her soul. Born Margarita Cancino, she was ordered to erase her Spanish roots, forced to undergo painful electrolysis to push back her hairline, and rebranded into a fantasy America would buy. Hollywood gave her stardom, but only by stripping away who she really was. By the 1940s, Hayworth was the most desired woman on screen. In Gilda, 1946, she removed a single glove and set the world aflame, creating one of the most iconic moments of film noir. Soldiers in World War II carried her pinups into battle, swearing she was the dream they'd return home to. But even at her peak, Rita's life was marked by control and exploitation. Columbia Pictures boss Harry Cohn dictated her public image, pairing her with studio-approved men and pushing her into headlines as carefully as he pushed her onto sets. Her marriages, too, bore the fingerprints of Hollywood's machinery. She wed actor-director Orson Welles in 1943, a fiery union that collapsed under rumors of betrayal. Later, in a move that shocked America, she became a princess by marrying Prince Ali Khan of Pakistan. Yet even that fairy tale ended in humiliation, with tabloids feasting on their bitter separation. For Rita, love often meant disappointment, and every heartbreak became another headline. By the 1950s, the spotlight dimmed, roles grew fewer, and the industry she once defined seemed ready to discard her. In her later years, a crueler fate awaited: the slow, devastating decline of Alzheimer's disease. At a time when little was understood of the illness, her fading memory was mistaken by many as bitterness or scandalous behavior. The same press that had crowned her goddess now wrote of her as though she were already gone. The tragedy of Rita Hayworth was not that she lacked beauty or talent. It was that Hollywood consumed both until nothing remained. She gave the world a dream, yet in her final years, she became its most poignant reminder. Behind every goddess lies a woman the system never truly loved. Number 16. George Reeves. Superman's suspicious death. The shot rang out in the quiet Los Angeles night of June 16, 1959. Moments later, George Reeves, the beloved star of television's Adventures of Superman, was found dead in his Benedict Canyon bedroom. The official verdict was simple: self-inflicted, but the scene was anything but. Guests were downstairs, no fingerprints were lifted from the gun, and rumors swirled that the Man of Steel had been silenced by something far more sinister than despair. To millions of children in the 1950s, George Reeves was Superman incarnate. His square jaw, bright smile, and reassuring presence brought comfort to post-war households. Yet, behind the cape, Reeves was increasingly frustrated, typecast by the role that made him famous. Feature film work dried up, and gossip columnists noted his discontent. But frustration alone didn't explain the tangled web that surrounded him. Reeves had been romantically linked to Toni Mannix, the wife of MGM fixer Eddie Mannix, a man whose connections to organized crime were whispered about in every studio backlot. The affair ended bitterly, and Reeves soon became engaged to another woman. Those close to him said he feared retaliation. When his body was discovered, friends pointed to bruises, delayed police response, and conflicting accounts from party guests. Some swore they heard multiple gunshots before anyone checked the bedroom. Theories multiplied. Was it an impulsive act by a man trapped by typecasting, or was it vengeance, carried out on behalf of a betrayed woman and a powerful husband with underworld ties? Books, documentaries, and even the film Hollywoodland 2006 have returned again and again to the question. The case remains officially closed, but the cloud of suspicion has never lifted. The cruelest irony was that George Reeves gave America its first true superhero. He symbolized strength, hope, and incorruptibility at a time when the nation craved it most. Yet his own end was clouded by weakness, secrets, and whispers of corruption. Superman was supposed to be invincible. George Reeves proved that even the strongest man on television could not escape the shadows of Hollywood. Number 17. Jackie Coogan. The child star robbed blind. When Jackie Coogan turned 21, he expected to inherit a fortune. Instead, he found his bank account empty, every dollar gone. The millions he had earned as Hollywood's most beloved child star, stolen not by shady producers or crooked lawyers, but by the people closest to him, his own parents. It was the kind of betrayal that stunned America and forced Hollywood to change its laws forever. Coogan was more than a child actor. He was a phenomenon. Discovered by Charlie Chaplin, he co-starred in The Kid, 1921, where his tear-streaked face beside Chaplin's tramp became one of silent cinema's most enduring images. By the mid-1920s, his name was emblazoned on theater marquees from New York to Paris. He toured the world, mobbed by fans, and by some estimates, earned over $4 million, a staggering sum in the jazz age. Audiences believed they were watching the fairy tale of a child lifted into stardom, but the reality was far darker. Coogan's parents, who controlled his contracts, spent his fortune on lavish cars, homes, and parties. When Jackie finally came of age, he discovered the fortune he had built was gone. Even worse, when he sued his mother and stepfather in 1938, his mother coldly told reporters no promises were ever made to give him anything. Every dollar a kid earns before he is 21 belongs to his parents. The cruelty of the statement shocked Depression-era Americans already disillusioned by broken dreams. The scandal sparked outrage. Newspapers fumed, columnists wept over the betrayal, and the public demanded reform. The result was the California Child Actors Bill, forever known as the Coogan Law, requiring a portion of a child star's earnings to be protected in trust. It was Hollywood's first attempt to shield children from its own machine. Though Jackie Coogan's fortune was gone, his career endured in surprising ways. Decades later, he found new fame as Uncle Fester in the Addams Family television series of the 1960s, his bald head and wild eyes a far cry from the cherubic boy beside Chaplin. The irony is chilling. Jackie Coogan gave Hollywood its first great child star and lost everything because of it. His tragedy became every child actor's protection, but at a cost no fortune could repay. Hollywood's golden glow hid shadows of heartbreak, betrayal, and mystery. These stories remind us that behind every legend lies a secret. Share your thoughts in the comments, and if you want more untold Hollywood truths, be sure to like this video and subscribe for the next chapter.